The evolution of first-person shooters from Maze War to Call of Duty, and how to be an esports judge. Today on Main Game.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Main Game, the show that is locked, loaded and ready to go guns a-blazing with the best in video games. I'm your host Ifa Hazim.
And I'm your co-host Lewis Larkham from Kakuchopurei, already thinking about my favourite space loadouts and imaginary pew-pews.
Sounds like this might be your favourite kind of gaming, the first-person kind where a mouse button click is all it takes for that clean headshot.
Or one flick of an analog stick, but yes, I'm ecstatic about this episode because we're going to be covering both FPS games and esports, my bread and butter.
Speaking of esports, that upcoming segment is actually on a particularly unique kind of job in esports and what it takes to get there.
And with that, let's have our crosshair ready on our first segment, Lowdown.
Okay, so Luis, as a self-proclaimed expert, why don't you break down what FPS games are for those who might not know at home?
Well, the definition is pretty simple and self-explanatory. FPS games stand for first-person shooter, usually games with guns that you play from a first-person perspective.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty simple, but there must be more to first-person shooters, right?
Well, FPS games come in two main flavors: tactical shooters such as Counter-Strike and Valorant, and arena shooters like Quake or Call of Duty. Tactical shooters prioritize slower, more strategic gameplay that incorporates teamwork and realistic weapon mechanics. Arena shooters, on the other hand, offer a faster-paced action, emphasizing individual performance, movement, and simpler weapon mechanics. But there are also some outlier types of shooters like hero shooters such as Overwatch.
That's a lot to digest. So how about we find out how this illustrious genre started? Here is the first part of Main Game's abridged history of first-person shooters, aka the FPS genre.
In the wonderful world of video games, no genre is as insanely iconic than the first-person shooter. No other genre empowers players like the first-person shooter, and maybe the third-person shooter cousin. There's just something so pure about being your own avatar, moving around in a particular empowering viewpoint, and just blasting everything in sight. Like any popular video game genre, first-person shooters had quite a turbulent start since the 70s. In order to find out why we appreciate this genre and why it's popular, we have to go back to the past. The first ever first-person shooter was Maze War, back in 1973. It was unlike anything anyone has ever seen back then, with the game featuring a 3D maze that had players shooting each other on sight. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the first instance of multiplayer deathmatch. Primitive, yes, but it was the first. One of the most important FPS entries with influences on the soon-to-be-coined genre is 1980's Battlezone. This classic first-person title comes with vector-rendered tanks and awesome rotation and movement for its time. Clunky now, of course, but it set the key foundation for future things to come, especially on the PC market in the early 90s. 1992 saw the shareware release of Wolfenstein 3D, the creation of a small-time game studio called id Software, led by FPS pioneers John Carmack, John Romero, Tom Hall, and Adrian Carmack. After they were done making 2D games and fulfilled obligations with their previous publisher, last game being a 3D marvel called Haventank 3D, they went big with Wolfenstein 3D, where he fought evil Nazi soldiers and horrors in first-person form as Beefcake Warrior BJ Blazkowicz. Yeah! The game sold 200,000 copies within a year, which led to id Software's publisher, Apogee, asking for sequels and even an 800 player-made level collection. It was clearly a hit among the PC crowd. 18 months later, there was Doom. Not the concept of Doom, but rather the most revolutionary first-person shooter of all time. In Doom, you play a space marine who has to destroy demons and monsters on the moon, all coming from heck. The game was big, it was bold and faster, and it looked gorgeous and scary and gruesome with the lighting tech, height-based designs and all. Heck, Doom got big because of its multiplayer deathmatch modes, which subsequently inspired many other future shooters to make the mode mandatory. And also for its insane mod scene. Doom shaped gaming history for the better. Other developers made their own Doom clone or corridor shooter, a term for first-person shooters long before it was even coined. Most likely the term was made when there were more advanced games using upgraded game engines and 3D engines, like Build or Unreal or Gold SRC, aka the Half-Life engine. These pseudo-realistic elements eventually evolved the Doom clone term to something a bit more sophisticated and more in line with a genre name. The tech and creativity of developers also introduced a huge number of innovations and breakout gameplay mechanics, whether it's new ways to shoot things, interacting with the level outside of blasting, or telling an immersive story to raise stakes and create iconic moments. If you fancy polygons, you can thank the 996 id Tech-powered game Quake. No 2D sprites here, everything was full-on 3D and movement was very fast with a consistent frame rate. Multiplayer deathmatch-wise, Quake 3 was the entry that was solely focused on that and made brand new open arenas to accommodate more players and frag opportunities. Hence, the arena shooter subgenre was born. 998's Unreal from Epic Games, aka the Fortnite makers, was Quake's direct competitor, pushing for better looking graphics and faster gameplay. Because of how fast online gaming was getting, Epic Games released Unreal Tournament the next year, which was a multiplayer-focused online and LAN title where the best fragger wins. In any case, both Quake and Unreal's engines were used by other video game companies to make their own first-person games, be it shooters or RPGing. Half-Life 998 featured a specially made game engine that's well suited for telling its narrative and uses scripted sequences to accentuate its immersive atmosphere and oncoming sci-fi thrills. In addition, Half-Life had a very active modding scene, notable for unwittingly paving the way for competitive shooters. But what about the genre on consoles? While it's tough to make, developer Rare made it possible with the Nintendo 64 multiplayer licensed FPS hit GoldenEye 007. We also have to mention the realistic World War II set shooter Medal of Honor in 1999, which put players in the shoes of a soldier going through Office of Strategic Services missions. This wouldn't be the end of military shooters. Long story short, the 90s was indeed a grand old time for first-person shooters, evolving in many different ways and offering many unique experiences, mostly revolving around shooting, sure, but in so many flavors. But the best is yet to come, because we have the rest of the 2000s to talk about.
And that was a very in-depth look at the early years of the first-person shooters genre, or FPS for short. So Luis, do you have any favorite shooters? No, wait, okay, let me guess. Call of Duty?
I mean, was it that obvious? But yeah, I've really enjoyed the latest few Call of Duty titles because I feel as though these latest Call of Duties have been a return to form, reminiscent of the early 2010s, at least from a multiplayer standpoint.
Are any of the older Call of Duty games historically accurate, at least the ones portraying World War II and the 70s war period?
Yes, they do. Developer Infinity Ward back in the day really took their time and found the resources to make immersive World War II scenarios feel like the player was there in the thick of the action. Coupled with clever scripted sequences, great use of AI-controlled allies during these single-player sequences, and a huge emphasis on squad-based play in its design, you pretty much have a solid meal ticket. The kind that makes franchises last as long until the end of time.
There also are the shooters that require group play. Some of them are even in esports. Maybe you can tell us more about this.
Shooters are really popular since way back when, so it's no surprise that the multiplayer aspect of the genre ended up in esports competitions and events. Counter-Strike, Valorant, PUBG, though the latter is a third person, but still should be considered as one of the higher echelon titles in esports.
Sounds like we have a special esports segment coming. Don't go anywhere, viewers. We'll be right back, reloaded and fully armed after these commercials. Welcome back The world of esports is getting bigger and more organized than before. With even the Olympics Committee being involved, players and teams need to be kept in check by official bodies and judges. Here's a look at one of esports' more unconventional roles.
When we think of esports, we often focus on the players that take center stage, like Faker, Simple, and Tens. However, one role is frequently overshadowed: the referees and judges, or as they are professionally known, technical officials. These individuals are typically in the background, but they play a crucial role in ensuring fair play and maintaining the integrity of competitions. But what exactly do they do? Well, let's hear it from Tiffany Lim, an Olympic-level technical official who refereed Dota 2 at the most recent Asian Games.
For what we do as a judge or referee, I'll use the Asian Games as an example again. We had both ITOs, International Technical Officials, and NTOs, National Technical Officials, on site, working hand in hand at each game station where matches were happening. So the NTO's role is probably closer to that of referees in usual esports tournaments. They do things like hosting lobbies, standing behind athletes, and monitoring their gameplay, behavior, and such. So it's more hands-on, and you deal directly with athletes most of the time. And as for us ITOs, which is equivalent to the head referee, we have a broader responsibility in the sense where it's more about overseeing the entire field of play. So whenever something happens, right away, we as ITOs, we have to call for a pause, and immediately we have to gather all advice and input from all the different parties on site. We have to consult the rulebook and arrive at the final decision, and then we appear on the live broadcast with relevant arm gestures to signify actions like a game loss, a rematch, penalty, and so on. And ultimately, we have to sign off on all result sheets.
So what exactly does it take to become a technical official?
So we don't have an existing certification system for the selection of international referees yet. And I know that federations like IESF and AESF are both trying to set it up, but we don't currently have a sizable database or network yet. So refereeing in esports also requires an entirely different skill set compared to that of traditional sports. So it's not like we can just use referees from other sports. And based on my observations, all the other ITOs working at the Asian Games were also very experienced members of the esports industry in different capacities. Some from the TO side, meaning tournament organizer, some from the athlete side. There were even a few from the government, media, or traditional sports side. So all in all, I would say it was a good mix. We all spoke different languages, we came from different parts of Asia. So we were always able to discuss and provide different perspectives and opinions on various matters.
And with that said, what are some of the challenges that come with being an ITO?
So one of the biggest challenges in this line of work would be that judges or referees have to bear any pressure associated with the decision making. So often before making decisions, we need to consider the perspectives of the athletes, the broadcasting team, the venue team, the games organizing committee, as well as the National Olympic Councils who are handling the competing athletes, and how we might justify our decisions if they decide to file a dispute, given the high stakes involved in a medal sport at a multi-sport event. Another challenge that we face is probably balancing the interests of the organizing committee and the athletes. Because I've personally been on both sides of this, so sometimes I can also empathize with the athletes who have committed mistakes because they missed out on one clause in a 100-page rulebook, especially multi-sport event rules that are not commonly encountered in esports tournaments, or those who don't have capable coaches or managers to help fight their cases. And you know that all of them prepared 4 years for this. So to disqualify them for any reason is a big decision for the athlete. But at the same time, it's also the referees or the judges' job to ensure that justice and sportsmanship and the rules are upheld at these events.
And in the competitive realm of gaming, where split-second choices can sway a match's fate, these are the individuals who uphold fairness and integrity. Their role goes beyond rule enforcement though. They need a deep understanding of the games they oversee, including mechanics and strategies. On top of this, sharp analytical skills help them assess complex situations and make quick, decisive calls under pressure. Furthermore, they embody sportsmanship values and respect for competitors, impacting match outcomes and the global perception of esports as a whole. So let's remember and appreciate the vital role referees and judges play in preserving the competitive spirit of esports alongside players, coaches, and organizers.
Thank you for the insight, Tiffany. And I just want to say, wow. I never thought about referees in esports that much before this. They really are integral to the sport, aren't they, Luis?
Yes, they are. As they say in Overwatch, play nice, play fair.
Exactly. Just like in football or any sports, you need this kind of rules to make sure no one is cheating, no one is bending the rules, and everyone gets a fair head. I'm guessing this applies to the esports shooters we brought up briefly?
Yes, see, there are hacker tools players can use in online games like Counter-Strike or Valorant where you can see through walls. There are also tools called aimbots where it helps players aim at the opponent's vital parts automatically. Obviously, these tools are illegal to use and it's up to referees, judges and other overseer roles to make sure no foul play exists during tournaments.
This is definitely similar to doping in real sports, also a big no-no in competitive play. Are there any such instances in esports where players try to get an edge over the competition using illegal substances?
Well, allegedly. Some teams in PUBG and Dota 2 have been accused of taking performance-enhancing drugs like Venvance and Adderall, but so far no punishment has been dished out as far as I know. Doping enforcement in esports doesn't seem to really exist, but I hope that does change in the future.
Okay, I'm sure responsible esports bodies and organizations will set their sights on that issue soon enough. But for now, let's take time out and change up our loadout. We'll be back after these commercials, so stay tuned. Welcome back. We're now on the final third of our trigger-happy episode of Main Game.
That's right, Aoife. We will be checking out the games that help shape the first-person shooter genre for the better from the year 2000 up until now.
Here is the second part of Main Game's abridged history of first-person shooters. Fire away, Jonathan.
In our previous segment, we talked about the influential first-person shooters from the 70s to late 90s. So let's dive into the 2000s and bring up the major FPS games that influenced the genre for years to come. 2000's PlayStation 1 game, Aliens Resurrection, a first-person shooter based on the terrible Alien sequel, paved the way for modern FPS controls. It was the first game to use both analog sticks of the DualShock controller for simultaneous movement and aiming. Naturally, every game developer copied that bright idea since. Nothing shifted the FPS market more than 2001's Halo Combat Evolved, a first-person shooter from Bungie, who made the Marathon series. It was an Xbox exclusive. It was a first-person shooter with new mechanics like shields and the ability to carry only 2 weapons, thus making players frequently change weapons on the fly, meaning more exciting gameplay and new weapons to use and abuse. It also added open area combat arenas, vehicular combat options from trademark jeeps to Scarab tanks, and an ever-flowing narrative taken after titles like Half-Life. And also deathmatch multiplayer with local 4-player split screen or LAN online play, all exclusively for its origin console. Halo and its 2 other exclusive sequels down the line were so influential in sales and core game mechanics that many other publishers and developers wanted to make their own sci-fi shooter title. Call of Duty in 2003 started out quote-unquote humble as an immersive and big-budgeted World War II era shooter made by Infinity Ward, a team formed by the many lead developers of the Medal of Honor series. Each entry was bigger and better than the last, though the time periods do switch up to either Modern Warfare times to even the 70s. Either way, the series made bank for publisher Activision Blizzard due to its fast-paced multiplayer modes and dedication to online play, as well as its gripping and explosive 6 to 8 hour single-player experiences that will make action director Michael Bay blush. The Call of Duty franchise, particularly Call of Duty 4, Modern Warfare, were also influential in shaping first-person shooters to the point that many other gaming companies tried to ape their success, or at least emulate the Modern Warfare part while adding their own realistic spin to it. With those influential first-person shooter milestones mentioned, the path of the genre has gone through many evolutionary steps. For example, 2009's Borderlands introduced the looter-shooter subgenre. 2016's Overwatch was the first hero shooter, clearly modeled after MOBAs. This is proof that genres can evolve from pinching ideas from other established genres. The future of shooters is pretty much golden, with new FPS titles and upcoming retro-tailored boomer shooters for those who crave the good old days of the 90s and early 2000s. Arguably more popular than most game genres, the first-person shooter will still be sticking around as long as its millions of players still want to headshot or hit-scan somebody.
And that was quite a deep dive into the second half of FPS history. Thank you again, Jonathan. Since it's going to be Ramadan's month in a couple more days and we're on a roll with first-person shooters, do you have any recommendations, Luis, especially ones with lower price tags? Games are getting really expensive these days.
Well, I mean, that's what I'm here for. But yes, if you're looking for some low price tag FPS games, then there's obviously free ones like Counter-Strike and Valorant. But if you're looking for something that's a little more single player, then I'd recommend a game I reviewed last year called Turbo Overkill, which is a fast-paced shooter with retro and modern elements where you play as Johnny Turbo in a dystopian city overrun by mutants. Despite facing challenges with the level design and difficulty spikes, it offers around 15 hours of intense gameplay and a banger soundtrack. Another would be from our resident voice guy Jonathan, who also recommends a shooter called Ultra Kill, which can only be described as Quake meets Devil May Cry. You shoot enemies and do it in a stylish manner with unique weapons you're given. Part of the game's fun is replaying segments for that triple S ranking. Easier said than done, of course.
Okay, how about something a bit more multiplayer and competitive? A shooter where I can team up with friends to tackle enemies?
If you want a classic player versus enemy experience, you can't go wrong with Left 4 Dead 2. Praised as one of the best kind of co-op games to play to kill your time until the end of fasting period.
Okay.
Another co-op shooter would be RoboQuest. You play as a robot as it goes through a gauntlet of FPS corridor shooter levels, getting more power-ups as you progress like a roguelite. The weapons you get are tiered like colored loot in looter shooters, but the action goes by really fast.
All right, and there you have it, 4 FPS games to get. To recap, that's Turbo Overkill, Ultra Kill, Left 4 Dead 2 and RoboQuest. They're all highly recommended by us. They are all available on PC and will not break your wallet. That's the most important thing. Anything for console?
Call of Duty's Battle Royale Warzone, because it's free. Enough said. But with that, we are done with today's guntastic episode of Main Game. Be sure to tune in again next week for more gaming goodness as well as new topics and features to tackle. I'm your sharpshooting co-host Lewis Larkham.
And I'm your dual welding host Aoife, signing off. Goodbye.
Goodbye.